everybody. Today I'm excited to welcome the kind and very nice guy called Ben Rouse, founder of Evolving Design, to the podcast. Ben is all about helping teams thrive through effective collaboration. He believes everyone has creativity to share and deserves to be heard, and he's here to dive into how facilitation can unlock that. In this episode, we'll get an inside look at one of Ben's signature workshops as he walks us through its design and how it evolves after running it multiple times. Hi, Ben. How are you?
I'm good. Delighted to be here. Yeah, it's really exciting. Thank you for having me on.
You are right now in London, right?
So I'm in my house. So it's south of London by about an hour. So into the countryside. For those people that know it, kind of on the Surrey, West Sussex border. But most of my work tends to take place in London. So I'm normally in London 2 or 3 days a week.
I'm so happy to have you here because our paths has crossed. We have common people in our network. Tell me a little bit more about your background so that we know where you're coming from.
Absolutely, yeah. Actually, there's a few. I think we represent two people where people presume we probably know each other prior to this point. Because your good friend Audrey was on a sales and marketing for freelancers that I did with Penny Blackmore, and obviously through some of the other communities. Yeah, I think people probably thought we'd probably done this already. So in terms of my background, so I would imagine that the majority of the workshoppers you've had on have got backgrounds in UX or Agile or some corporate background. While I've got a bit of that, my majority of my previous work was as a maths teacher. So I think a slightly different route. Yeah, though I can talk about the parallels with what from my teaching experience makes facilitation feel a bit easier. Yeah. I don't worry about difficult attendees, I can tell you that. Yeah, so from being a maths teacher, I started using technology a bit more in my classroom when I was leading a maths department, and that turned into leading educational technology across a group of schools. So it involved a lot of training, and I realized in the training that when I talked about the technology, nobody cared at all. So as I kind of tried to adapt around this, I was like, what? I'd show a piece of technology and people honestly weren't too bothered. Mm-hmm. And actually, I got the best bit of feedback ever from a colleague, French colleague, in fact, who said to me, I went up to her because I knew she'd be honest. She's from the north of France originally. And she said,
always honest.
Yeah. So I knew I'd get an honest answer. And I'd just done a training for all the staff. And I said to her, how was that for you? And she is like, you know what, Ben? Good for you. Well done. You're doing lots of great things, but I've clearly missed the boat. So I don't care. It's too hard, too far for me to go. I'm out. I was just like, well, that is insightful. So I kind of took that on board and realized that my session had not solved a problem for her. It didn't resonate with any of the challenges she had. Mm-hmm. So I kind of sort of started focusing more on understanding what people wanted to achieve and how I could support them in solving their challenges. So it turned out, after a bit of reading around and going to various sessions, that I was doing something similar to design thinking in being user-focused. So that was kind of the beginning of this journey. I heard a guy called Ewan McIntosh speak in Toulouse, and he was talking about using design thinking with schools, and it just really aligned with what I was doing. So that was the start of the journey. Tried using some design thinking approaches with the schools I was working with, and it turned more into working with the school leadership. Mm-hmm. And similar actually to the story Jonathan Courtney talks about with AJ and Smart, where they were doing long engagements and the team by the end of the long engagement weren't really inspired to do the project anymore, which is where he made this switch to the design sprint, where everyone was much more engaged and various other things. So that was kind of the switch. I discovered the design sprint, and it worked much more effectively for the types of timescales I had with teams. It could be compartmentalized wouldn't necessarily work as a 4-day, but I started to pull out parts of the design sprint and use them in isolation. And then, yeah, it kind of, I got more requests for strategy rather than technology. And kind of leads me to where I am now, doing strategy sessions for teams, and not just in education, in a variety of sectors. Does that make some sense?
Yes,
It's a bit of a weird,
absolutely.
I think.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we are all starting to be interested in this kind of methods because we have ourselves a problem to solve. I mean, I was a project manager. I was just looking how to align teams of engineer and assembly people who don't talk the same language, but have a common goal. So we are all starting somewhere because we are searching for methods to bring these people together and to make sessions intentional and with a goal at the end and with the outcome at the end. So you made it. So you moved, actually, if I understand you right, you moved from your teacher role to more and more a facilitator, and you quit at the end, or?
Not quite that moment you'd imagine where I'm just, walk out into the distance. It was more of a gradual thing. So I was working in the school still, but I was getting training requests from further afield. Actually, I probably have a gentleman called Evan Share to thank for all of this, because I think this was like 2013, I'd applied to the Google Teacher Academy. It's now called the Google Innovator Academy. It's for educators, and you apply with a challenge you want to solve. And it's essentially the design sprint methodology is used. So you take along your challenge and then you use the design sprint approach to then come up with ideas to take away and prototype and test. So I attended this in 2013 in London, and I met Evan. And Evan at the time was working at a school in Frankfurt. And he, after the event, he got in touch and said, would you like to come and do a session at my school in Frankfurt? And I was like, yes, of course I do. And I paid for my flight and I went over, and it turns out that this event was being run by an organization called Apps Events. I met the founder of Apps Events. He seemed to like the session and asked me if I'd like to do some more. So I was then started, then it was an event in Prague and an event in Rome and an event in Stockholm and some in New Hampshire. And so I was teaching in the week. And then normally these events would be sort of Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So I'd get released from school, fly on the Friday, do the event on the Saturday, Sunday, and then back into school on the Monday. And there was once when I was doing an event in Doha and my flight got delayed and I was having to sort of phone the school from Abu Dhabi to try and get my lessons covered. And I thought, this is a bit much. I also had at the time 2 young children, and there's lots of videos now when we look back of my wife with 2 young boys going, say hello to daddy on the phone. So for a variety of those reasons, it kind of came to a point where I needed to pick one job. So I started working with Apps Events. And that, I suppose in theory I was freelance, but I was on a retainer with them. So it wasn't fully freelance, but that was when I kind of kicked off the company. And then over time, I started doing a few events. If I'm frank, there were a couple of events where I still got paid my retainer, but the fee that the client was paying was significantly higher than that. And that was kind of the catalyst to thinking, well, could they pay that to me directly? And at that point, it was like, it wasn't really a team. I was the thing that was, it was just off my back to do those sessions. And so that was the catalyst to have a look at really doing the freelance thing and seeing if I could bring in my own work. But as you know better than anyone, that's an interesting journey, isn't it?
I think what you've done is a good way to start. I mean, you were leaving something very secured, teaching in a school. So I don't know if it's the same in in the UK, but normally this is a safe job. And then you were starting with, how is it called in the UK when you're working for, there is a name for this.
Associate?
Associate.
Yeah.
I think it's a good way to start to see if what you are doing or what you want to do has resonance, and then taking the lead.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, all thanks to, particularly to Dan Taylor, who is the person I met in Frankfurt, who runs the company and took a chance on me and provided that retainer.
Very nice. And today you're here because I saw your work, and we see this beautiful picture behind you called How to Run Productive Meetings. And you will tell us more about this, because this is kind of signature workshops you've created to address common challenge in organization. And I would like to go through this workshop from design to delivery to have it as a use case. But first, how did that come about?
Good question. So what started me on my journey was a dislike of many meetings. And I think it's probably true of a lot of people in our line of work, that you're just kind of sitting in a meeting going, there's got to be a better way. And that's where I started. And then obviously getting to run and facilitate workshops is amazing. But generally speaking, at the moment, the types of workshops that I run, they are probably the type of workshop that a company will get me in, or someone like me, maybe once a year, maximum 4 times a year, maybe a quarterly team off-site or retreat. So that's amazing. And it's a real privilege to work with those teams on, lots of NDAs signed, and you get into understanding all of these different organizations and what they're trying to achieve. But the reality is that in between me coming in for an offsite or a retreat once or twice a year, there are hundreds and thousands of meetings and times when teams come together. So often at the end of the workshop, someone will approach me just trying to understand, I really like the way that worked. How could I do that with my team? Or how could we start to adopt that in the way that we work? So the reality was I wasn't going to get invited in weekly to run those meetings. It's about building their capacity. So that was kind of the starting point for thinking about, well, what could I share that's not really how to become a facilitator, but how to take parts of facilitation and just apply them in your role, whether that's a weekly meeting or sort of project kickoffs and things like that. So that was kind of the genesis of it. Honestly, I think the bit that really made me do it was a book by Rob Fitzpatrick and Devin Hunt, just called How to Design and Teach Workshops That Work Every Time. Sounds encouraging.
Yes.
And it's not a thick book, which I like, and it's just really simple tips for how to structure. So I was reading through it, and when a book makes you want to do something,
yes,
you get sort of a few pages in and you have to get a notebook out and the sticky notes out, and you're like, right, this has sparked something. So that was one of those. So I was looking at, okay, let me try this out with my own approach. Yeah, let me apply this to something. And I was like, well, people are always asking about facilitation approaches. So that's when it's like, well, let's have a think about what I would do in this structure from the book to deliver a workshop on improving meetings. So that's how it got started. And then ultimately what I was thinking about, what do I use? What do I always get out of my back pocket if, it's a quick meeting? And things like the sailboat activity is one that's very easy for lots of teams to use. Also, there are a few activities from liberating structures I use regularly, whether that's on the basic level, like a 1, 2, 4 all. So that's where, rather than, I suppose, what does the bad version look like is, when you want everyone to feedback, people have been doing things in a discussion or an activity, and you just want to hear from everyone. But the big problem with that is if it's more than 5 people, it can take a very long time. And by the time like the 25th person talks, there's very little left. They're not very inspired to say anything because everyone else has spoken. So 1, 2 for all just gives everyone a minute to think about what they thought about everything, then pair up and share, then come into 4s and share, and then each 4 shares back. So everybody talks, you get heard by your pair, but ultimately it's not everybody sharing. There's a summary from each group. So that's why, things like that I use all the time. So I was like, okay, so that would seem like something that's easy for people to put into their meetings. So I started throwing those into this structure, and the structure from the book is a lot of 3s. 3, as you know, is the magic number. So 3 sections, 3 objectives for each section was kind of how I ended up structuring this one. So I don't know how, depends whether you're listening or watching, I think, but this is the capture behind me that Sam Carpenter did during the first running of the workshop. So she did live. Yeah. She's amazing. But yeah, like on here, you can see the 3 sections. So why do meetings go wrong is where we started. So what's the problem? Then kind of how to make them more productive. And then the bit that's just off my visibility is like the action plan. So I sort of, it's very meta actually. I thought, well, if I'm going to tell people how to plan effective meetings and workshops, I better use it myself. So I created a template and used the template to plan the session where people then can use the template. So yeah,
to use
that was
themselves.
kind of the process. Yeah.
Okay. So if we are going now in the design of your session, you have 15 people in the room or 10 people in the room. And what is the first thing that you make? What is the first activity, so to say?
Yeah, so the first activity is, let me just, you know what, I'm in my Miro board now, which I know you've got access to as well.
Yes, I have access to it. Do you want to share?
Yeah. So if I share, I'll kind of, this is the right one. How's that? Is that coming through okay?
Yes, we see the Miro board. So for those who are listening and not watching, go to the YouTube channel La Workshoppers at La Workshoppers on YouTube, and then you can see the whole beautiful Miro board from Ben showing this live during the podcast.
Neat. Yeah, so I'm showing, at the moment, I'm showing the timeline, which is, this is the template that ultimately people walk away with. So after we've gone through the process, they have this a blank version of this that they can plan their meetings on. There is also a printable version that can just go in a desk drawer for like an easy scribble the meeting plan. But this one actually contains what we do in the session. So obviously there's a welcome and an icebreaker. I use big talk cards. Are you familiar with big talk cards?
No, tell me.
So it's the opposite of small talk. So, we might, when we start this off, I might ask you what the weather's like where you are. You say it's beautiful. I'll tell you it's not so beautiful here. So that's small talk. Big talk cards, it's a load of cards and they have questions that are a bit more significant. What is one thing you wish people knew about you? It might be one of those. So I often use big talk cards at the start of sessions. That was really useful because I think I used that one at the start. Like, what do you wish people knew? And what was a big surprise actually in the first session, everyone was really honest. So one person shared, people think I'm really confident, but I'm not. And they talked a bit more about that. And what was really useful for me as the facilitator was, that was really helpful for understanding that he was basically saying to me, don't just ask me to talk, because you may think I look like I'm confident to do that, but I'm really not. So it was really useful for how I could manage the session. And everyone shared, from that point on, people shared similar things. However, once we've gone through that icebreaker and I've got a sort of an understanding of how they're working, why meetings go wrong, I've split into 3 sections. So if you don't set and get expectations right, it's going to go wrong. If the wrong people are in the room, it's going to go wrong. And you kind of, then we looked at like agreeing what issues affect productivity. So the first session is trying to collect an understanding of what makes meetings go wrong. So for that, we used a TRIZ activity. So the TRIZ activity from Liberating Structures is to identify what is the worst way you could approach the challenge. So in this case, I ask everyone, what would make the most unproductive and awful meeting or workshop? And they all list all of these things. And what comes out of it tends to be no agenda. It's a random group of people who have no connection whatsoever. It's in a noisy space that's really echoey, where the speaker doesn't have a microphone. All of these things come out. And then it gives us a chance to group them. And ultimately what we are saying is, okay, so we want the expectations to be communicated clearly. We want it to stick to time and have some kind of plan. We want to be heard. And, that ultimately comes out with, okay, what do we think we're aiming for? Mm-hmm. So that's that kind of first approach. And then out of all of those different problems, there's a voting process to identify the ones that we think are most important, which gives us a kind of the stepping stone to, okay, now we've kind of said essentially what good meetings are because we've identified what we don't want. So that's a quite nice way to go. And I find the other aim for this was every activity we do, I wanted to be something that's very easy for someone else to run, even if they've not got big facilitation background. So TRIZ is like, what's the worst way we could build this product? What's the worst way we could approach this program, or different plans and approaches, or, what would make this strategy the worst strategy we could ever design? So that one felt like a good fit. And that kind of takes us up to that first break in that case.
It's very interesting.
So I ran this first as a half-day session. So it was 9:30 to 12:30. And one of the bits of feedback I got from this first opening session was, because the course is called How to Run Productive Meetings and Workshops. And we went into the TRIZ, and then we got to the break, and someone said, Ben, what's the difference between a meeting and a workshop? You're like,
good question.
Yeah. Do I have an answer for that? I like, interestingly, I think I just idly picked the title because I was like, well, meetings is what people have all day, but it does apply to workshops too. So I put both in, but I hadn't really thought as deeply as I needed to about it. So that was a good question. We talked about it. And then the next time I ran the course, it was a full day. And I didn't really add anything else in other than at the start, we did an axis where it was like productivity on the vertical axis and kind of meeting types along the horizontal. So that was from at the one end was a one-to-one meeting. And at the other end was like you're delivering to a conference of like 500 people. And I asked everyone to put on there like the meetings and workshops that they deliver in the, somewhere on that axis. And ultimately, we then talked about, okay, which is a meeting and which is a workshop. And the more interactive it is, the more likely people were to call it a workshop. And it was also, if the people in the gathering are more intentionally chosen, then it's more likely to be a workshop than a meeting. Meetings were perceived as when a random group of people come together, and it doesn't necessarily apply to everyone. So that was really interesting in the second one. And that's the kind of the added bit I've now got is we do actually explore what I mean by that.
You make the collect on with the axis, but it doesn't change the TRIZ afterwards. So your TRIZ is still about meetings, right?
Yeah. So what it allows us to do with the axes is actually identify the ones that we really don't like. And it also, what it usefully did was it had people think about different types of ones and therefore what goes wrong. So it still works. There's a virtual version coming in February, March 2025. And I've changed the name. So instead of how to run productive meetings and workshops, where I'm going with the next version is turn meetings into workshops, meaning take your unplanned gathering of random people and turn it into a more intentional, interactive experience. Essentially what people want to do. So that's the new version. The content isn't hugely different, but it's just a bit more intentional about what we're trying to achieve, I think.
Okay, so it means there is a course about this coming in February, March, when you teach the people how to facilitate, actually, if it's a meeting, a workshop, conference, but how to use facilitation to techniques and methods to facilitate these.
Yeah, so I've taken the full day version and I'm going to split it over 3 shorter sort of 2-hour sessions over 3 weeks. That's the first section, that introduction, what is a meeting, what is a workshop, and then the TRIZ. That's kind of the first, and that will make up the first kind of session for the online version.
Very nice. And the second part is going through how to do this, I guess, no?
Yeah. So how can you make them productive was the way I kind of phrased it for that bit. So we took all those issues and we kind of flipped them. Okay, so you want people to be heard. So I introduced the 1, 2, 4 all technique. It was a nice way to help people, like, here's an easy way that you can do that. So we use that in our discussions. And then I introduced the template, and also kind of where I've got my inspiration for the template from. So actually, the how to design and teach workshops that work every time is a good reference point, because in that book, it talks about the different formats. So it might be that you want to use small groups. And actually, there's a lot in the book about how you set up the space to remove cognitive load for people. So if you've got people sitting in rows and you ask them to get into threes, it just creates complication. But if you put chairs in circles of 6, it's much easier. So there's simple bits there. So you could have small groups. Sometimes you need to lecture. You know, you don't want to do it all the time, but sometimes you need to share information. I added this one myself, which is I love alone time. Does that make me sound like a hermit? But what I mean is, I've been in a lot of situations where somebody has thought about a topic for a long period of time, and then they bring it to a meeting and they ask you to think about it in a split second.
Yeah, true.
Personally,
you need time to digest. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So I try to work that into my approach to workshops, is that time for people to think, process before they're required to share it with anyone else or action anything. So I added that one. But then there's also Q&A, sort of, it's a bit unstructured, but sometimes you just need to sort of gather things from the group. And then there's, scenario. So in this case, it might be in mine. I'm like, here's a meeting situation, design one that's more productive. And then try it is, well, okay, I showed you a sailboat. Have a go at running a sailboat yourself. So these are the different formats that the book by Rob Fitzpatrick and Devon Hunt mention. And that's what I kind of share in that sort of middle piece is think about the format. So I'm now, for those of you not watching, I'm now zooming out to a rather big Miro board I created with the sort of 5 steps to creating the workshop. If you don't want to use the paper template, I've got a rather big one. So it's like, what's the objective? What are the expectations? Splitting your outcomes into 3. So this is what I've done with mine. But then this middle bit of the session is really about, well, what do I use? So I use the 4 C's: collect, choose, create, and commit. That's how I structure a lot of my workshops. So I share that with them. I also use a lot of liberating structures, and I try to think about the different formats. So I know I needed to lecture for a short period of time. I needed to share, here's a book I use, this is the approach, this is how it works. But I also know I need to split that up with some other formats along the way. So that's what I try to share in that middle part of the workshop is, here's the information. So for example, there are sort of 5 books I highlight for people on the course. So as well as liberating structures and how to design and teach workshops that work every time, the 2 I've mentioned so far, I use the design sprint methodology a lot. So a lot of the exercises from the design sprint are things that I use. The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker is something I reference a lot. There's not so much activities, but just the approach that it talks about in that book is something that I think about when I'm bringing people together. And then also game storming is one where I pull out a lot of activities from. So I mentioned those in that middle part as well. And what I also do is I fill in the template live in front of everyone for what we've done so far in the course. So I kind of show them how I would have done the template before, ready for when they use it. So again, I feel it gets a little bit meta, but it's quite a useful process of modeling for them how I'd use the template to create what we've done so far before they go on to use it later on in the session. That bit in the live course that I did works quite nicely between the break and the lunch. It takes up to lunch. I'm going to rejig that because it needs a bit more activity in it to be that middle session of the 3 online workshops. So there's a bit of a difference there. Maybe I should keep that a secret so people come along and find out how I do it.
Yes. Don't reveal everything. But you can reveal the last part. What is happening in the last part?
So what I've got in the last part is really a chance to learn a few more techniques and then apply it yourself. So we've got the sailboat. That's where the sailboat comes in. And the sailboat I structure as, so if you're not familiar with the sailboat, it's an opportunity to have people, first of all, say what's putting wind in their sails around a particular topic. So you get everyone to think about what's going well. So what I did in this case was I was like, what is going really well for you in your meetings and workshops? And they put the sticky notes above the waterline where we've drawn a sailboat. And what that allows me to point out to everyone is it would be stupid of me to assume that everyone attending the session can't do anything in a meeting or a workshop. They all have inevitably brought a set of amazing skills with them. So that's the opportunity to make sure we recognize the skill set in the room. So it gives me a chance to go around and say, look, we've got people in the room who are really good at making it inclusive. We've got people in the room who are really good at managing time. We've got people in the room who are really good at all these things. Before we then go below the waterline for the anchors, the things holding them back. So they list all the things that are frustrating them personally about their own meetings and workshops. And then we do a vote on the things that as a group, they think are the key bits they'd like to change. Now, this was another big learning from the first half-day version. We did the sailboat, we had the vote, and there in front of me were like 4 priorities that the room of people I was there to work with had said, we really want to solve these ones. And I hadn't really left enough time to do that. I was like, wait, that's a real big misstep. I tried to own it in the session, acknowledge it, and I adapted. But that was another bit I did with the full day, was I didn't add another activity particularly. I just left space for us to explore that. And essentially, we then do 10 for 10 ideas,
Mm-hmm.
where everybody creates ideas to solve the most voted problems from the sailboat. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of you might be going, I recognize this sailboat, followed by a 10 for 10. There's essentially a little lightning decision jam in the middle of it. Borrowing is flattery, right? Thank you, AJ and Smart.
Thank you, HN Smart.
So as we come towards the end, we know what everyone's good at in the room. We've identified the things we want to solve in our meetings and workshops, and we've come up with loads of ideas and voted for them. And then that means we're in a good place to go into the final part of pick a meeting or workshop that you've got coming up and apply the template to it. And everyone gets time, I put the music on, gets a bit of time to just go into the template, whether that's the Miro one or the physical printed version. And yeah, just get time to think about applying it to their next meeting or workshop. So in the first half-day version, people just networked in that time. It was really interesting. I thought, here's your time to work. And they just wanted to know what everyone else did and make connections, which I had no problem with, especially as some people asked for extra copies of the template as they left. So it wasn't that they didn't engage with the template. They just saw extra value from talking to someone else in the room. But then on the full day version, maybe I'd left enough time for networking this time. Yeah, everyone really engaged with applying it to their own approach. And then the final closing bit is another liberating structure, which is what, so what, now what? Again, one of my big pet peeves with any meeting or workshop is often it's a lovely time. You walk out and nothing changes. You know, everyone's kind of, bouncing out, but what happens next? So it's just a nice, simple activity. It's not too complicated, just to get everyone to think about what happened. So what? What impact is that going to have? And therefore, now what? What are you going to do? So it just allows everyone to commit to the one thing they're going to do. And that can often be, I'm going to use a sailboat in our next team retrospective. Mm-hmm. Perfect. I'm going to use 1, 2, 4 all next time we need to summarize a discussion. So some simple steps at the end. And so that's overall the approach. Trying to model it, trying to share the techniques and approaches I use. And more than anything, obviously with the sailboat, with the 10 for 10, with the 1, 2, 4 all, hopefully giving people something useful to take away that's manageable for them to use.
No matter if they are calling their session a workshop or a meeting, these are actually exercises that are working for everything. I mean, I started to use just the fact of using Post-its in meetings was a game changer for me as I was a project manager. As I was really starting, there were a lot looking at me like, what is she doing with her Post-its? But when I started to visualize everything, so simple things that you are not aware of when you are not when you have nothing to do with facilitation, when you start to use these methods as simple exercises like the sables or 10 for 10 or 1, 2, 4 that I really love, it helps to change the way you are running your meetings, your workshops, even your conferences, to get feedback from the people. You are doing this differently as soon as you know how to do this. Thank you so much for that. And we have already 45 minutes, so over time, but it was so interesting that it was a special episode with a use case, and I loved it. And before you tell me more about the course that you will deliver in February, March, this Miro board was looking amazing, reminding me, and this, of some of my boards. So we have also this kind of design in common, but you are my guest. So tell me about your visual content. It looks so beautiful. How did you do that?
So I had been playing around with trying to get Miro boards much better. And then someone shared a beach scene on LinkedIn of their Miro board with people on it, and there were surfboards and waves.
I didn't know that.
And then I kind of looked at my Miro boards and thought, mine are really boring. So I
didn't know that you saw this.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
Yes, if people aren't getting the reference, Natty did an amazing board. I'm sure you can share it in the show notes. And I was aware of Canvas. So like Canvas without the vowels provides a huge treasure trove of artifacts that you can put into not just Miro boards. So they come as PNGs and vector files. So I purchased that, and that was what enabled me to make that scene work in the way that I wanted to, of that journey through the process, and sort of really visualize it. It's actually an interesting connection as well between the drawing that's behind me that Sam Carpenter created is using a style called Bicarblo.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like Canvas that Lucy created is the digital kind of version of that, where you can take, instead of needing to draw it all by hand, you've got the pieces that you can pull together. And you know, the value add, you may have seen if you watched when I was sharing it, there's some little characters with sticky notes. And what the value add for me is, it's not just a generically created one, it's one that's created with workshopping in mind. So you've got like a sailboat picture in there. You're like,
yeah,
I'm using that exercise. So that's where it really hit home to help me kind of create that. And rather than making it a very dull, large Miro board, it felt a bit more relevant to give the visuals. So yeah, love it.
And I love
the
creator, Sia Golini. She was in the podcast. She's a good friend of mine. Really, the prices are so fair. Look at this. So you have the possibility to buy some of the icons or some of the little pictures. But the whole gallery is about more than 10,000 icons. So when we mean icons, these are all the little figures you saw on a wall or the floor or a tree, and you put all these elements together, whether in a presentation or on a Miro board, on a mural board, whatever. And you can have also, it's very good for your branding. If you are using always the same, you can change the color with your branded color. So I really love the fact that we have this in common also. We have a lot in common, Ben. This is crazy.
Really?
This facilitation world is really a little island, actually. I wanted to say a big world. No, a little island where everybody...
There's a Miro board coming now, isn't there? The Facilitation Island.
The Facilitation Island with everyone that I know, or everyone who was on the podcast. That would be a great idea.
Yes, because you need... So Jenny will insist, Jenny Martin, who you had on previously, would insist on finding a character with a quiff. And her quiff is relative to her level of excitement as well. So you got to make sure that is available and colourful as well. No, yeah. that could be really fun. Well, I had a question for you, actually, if I may.
Yeah.
So I've put in sailboat and 10 for 10 and 1, 2, 4 all. Is there any activity that you would add to that's kind of a great... Essentially, I'm trying to steal your expertise for the course, aren't I? But what would you add? How would you approach it differently? Because I know you're doing some similar work with some of your clients. What would you add?
I have also the sailboat. I have also the 10 for 10 in my course. I have also the 1 to 4, because 1 to 4 is really also one of my tricks. Even if it's not planned, this is an exercise that I always have in my pocket. If I see that that there is less engagement, then I twist what I'm doing right now and I twist it in a 1 to 4. So for me, this is really a bonus exercise. I really love the World Cafe. Do you know this?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, familiar with it, but I haven't actually had a chance to sort of really properly use it. What kind of situations do you use it in?
I use it when, for example, when I know that we have a session where the Hamite trees are defined in advance, for example, because there were a previous session or because the client is very clear about what kind of solution you want the people to work on. So what I like to do is to distribute 3 Hamai trees or 3 different teams on tables. So you have a big Hamai tree on the table. Of course, you need to make an introduction and to the topic. So it's not the first exercise, but the Hamai tree is letting people really discuss 15 minutes, 20 minutes on something and create. And then everybody is moving table. Only one person stay at the table, and he become the host, and he's welcoming the next team coming to add their thought on the first thought of the first teams. So, and there are 3 rounds, and at the end, everybody's coming together, and the host of each table will talk about what have been explored during this session. So I really like the World Cafe, for example. Do you like it?
Well, the reason I gave that long R was at a recent offsite, there were 3 key work streams that the team needed to focus on, and they rotated around them. And then we did a summary. But that would have worked slightly better if I'd left one person at each of those work streams and everyone else had rotated. So that would have been a bit of value add, I think. Yeah, I think it worked, but that would have been better. There you go. That's wise. Now I know.
Aha. So you can use it for next time.
This is the thing. Like, all the activities that are in all these books, reading through them is one thing. It's so much more helpful when someone else says, this is how I used it. And you're like, I don't know, it crystallizes for me when people like yourself talk about it, because I'm like, oh, and now I can now see it. Like, I would feel much more ready to use that next time.
But it's like me with your trees, as I saw how you use trees in this workshop. This what made me curious, because I really wanted to know how you use it. Thank you very, very, very much, Ben. So tell me again, your course will be
live online on
nice.
Tuesday, the 25th of February, 4th of March, and 11th of March. I'm aiming for 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. GMT. So yeah, 3 consecutive week 2-hour sessions. And there will be...
And there is a little surprise. And there is
there's a little special code for listeners as well.
Very nice. So you will get the code.
You'd think I'd have it ready right now. We can pass it on, right?
Yes. So I think this is something with Natty something, but you will get the code in the show notes. And I know this was a very long, exceptional episode with Ben. Ben, thank you so much for all your insights. Maybe I will be in your course in February, and I hope that you guys will register, because I think do you have a restrained number of person in the session?
We don't really want it to go above 20. I think that would be a bit tricky for the activity. So I'm aiming for 20 places on this one, and then if there's more, I can always do it again. But yeah, just to keep it manageable and useful for everyone. That was it. Feel like the maximum.
So learn how to run the workshop we just saw together, and learn how to run better meetings, effective meetings, and bring it to your companies or use it as a facilitator. It's in February. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't hesitate to contact our guest. You will find all the information in the show notes. And hey, if you like the content of There's a Workshop for That, please give it a 5 stars on your podcast app. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, La Workshopeuse. Also, I'd love to read your comments, suggestions of guests, or any question you have. For this, use the form called Hey Natty in the show notes. And until our next episode, I wish you good health, success, and lots of happiness. Au revoir.